Hamas published a new hostage video showing 2 Israeli hostages being driven around Gaza City. Negotiators continue to pressure both Israel and Hamas to return to the table. Both sides, however, have stated that they will agree to a complete ceasefire only on their own terms. Meanwhile, the Israeli military intensified its operations in northern Gaza, targeting high-rise buildings in a series of airstrikes and ordering Palestinians to evacuate towards the south. And on the political side, the Washington Post published an extensive article on the Trump administration's day-after plans for Gaza, envisioning smart cities and profitable industrial areas alongside a Trump Riviera resort. You're watching the Israel-Palestine Report with Professor Alon Burstein. Hit that subscribe button, and let's dive in. On Friday, September 5th, Hamas published a hostage video showing 2 Israeli hostages, Guy Gilboa Dalal and Alon. The video, which was published on the 700th day after the 2 were kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival during the October 7th attack, is the first life sign that Hamas has published of Ohel, and is the second video in which Gilboa Dalal appears. The last one was published in February, when he was seen next to another hostage, Evyatar David. The entire video is 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and the majority of it focuses on Gilboa Dalal as he is being driven around in a vehicle out in the open in Gaza City with tinted windows. He opens by stating that the video is being filmed on August 28th, and then recants the difficulties that he is facing in captivity, including shortages of food, water, and electricity and other basic humanitarian necessities. And he adds that the rest of the Gazan population and the rest of the hostages all face these shortages. He then sarcastically thanks Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu for allowing a minimal amount of bread and cheese to come into the Gaza Strip, which allows him to now eat, adding that this is being done while Netanyahu's son Yair is having barbecues in Miami. In the next scene, Gilboa Dalal discusses Israel's plans to invade Gaza City, the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, and states that he can't believe that this is what Israel is planning. He says that his captors have informed him that neither he nor another 8 hostages who are held in Gaza City will be evacuated, and that he is terrified of being killed in the fighting, as his captors have orders to not evacuate anyone, no matter how close the Israeli military gets to where they are being held. He then spends over a quarter of the video pleading with the Israeli public to go out and protest in full force and to compel the Israeli government to stop the war, and specifically appeals to hostages who had been held with him and Evyatar David and have since been released, asking them to go out and scream in their name. In the next scene, Gilboa Dalal is shown for 15 seconds being reunited with Alon as the 2 hug and say that they can't believe they are seeing each other. I'll say also that in those 15 seconds, Ohel is shown with severe eye damage, which other hostages that had been with him reported is part of an injury that he is suffering. In the last 40 seconds, Gilboa Dalal appears before the camera in the more common way hostages have been filmed until now, and he chastises the Israeli government and says that the hostages are in constant danger and are hearing the explosions around them in Gaza City non-stop, and that they all fear for their lives as a result of the military activity. Contrary to the way most hostage videos have ended, this one does not end with a fade-out calling for a deal, and instead just concludes with the Shohada symbol fading out. Before continuing to discuss the hostage situation, there are a few noteworthy points that I want to highlight from this video. First, contrary to the previous hostage videos, which were meant to illustrate the starvation conditions that hostages were in, and one of them, Evyatar David, was also shown digging his own grave, in this video, Hamas appears to want to make the opposite point, highlighting that hostages are now being treated better as a result of the entrance of humanitarian aid. I say this because Gilboa Dalal not only states that he is being given more food, but the video also makes a point of showing him eating something during their ride in Gaza City. Second, the setting in which Gilboa Dalal is driven around Gaza City, speaking while pedestrians pass by and making explicit point, saying that they stopped near the Red Cross in Gaza City, is seemingly all meant to highlight that the Israeli military does not actually have intelligence on where the hostages are held and about their whereabouts. Since, analyzing the situation, I'll say that given the state of fighting in Gaza City, the farthest that IDF troops would have been from where any vehicle would have been driving is likely no more than 2 miles in some places, 4 miles in another, and thus Hamas is illustrating hostages are held right near where the IDF is, but the military does not know. Third, it is also important to note that while the video was reportedly filmed on August 28th, it was not published until a week later, and during that week, Abu Ubaida, who is Al-Qassam's spokesperson and the man who was in charge of hostage videos and all propaganda, was assassinated by the IDF. And I mention this because that may be associated with the different ending of the video, since Abu Ubaida was the one who was in charge of the messaging of such films. Obviously, that's speculation on my part. However, I'm just adding this as a possibility to why that film ended differently than most of the hostage videos that have been recorded and published by the Al-Qassam brigades. Turning more broadly to the hostage situation and where do things stand. As a reminder, coming into this past week, the negotiators were still waiting for Israel to give an official response to the partial proposed deal, which Hamas had agreed to, while Israel in turn repeatedly stated that it would only negotiate a comprehensive deal that fulfills its stated goals for ending the war. Addressing this stalemate, on September 3rd, U.S. President Trump put out a message urging Hamas to come to a deal and to release all 20 live hostages, rather than focusing on a partial deal and saying things will change after that. Hours later, Hamas responded by issuing a statement that the group is still waiting for Israel's response to the previous partial deal that Hamas agreed to. But in addition, Hamas stated that, I quote, Hamas again expresses its willingness for a comprehensive deal where all Israeli hostages will be released in exchange for an agreed-upon amount of Palestinian prisoners, and an end to the war and an IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, opening the crossings into Gaza and beginning the rebuilding plans. The group added that it also agrees to the establishment of, again I quote, a technocratic national government to manage all matters in Gaza and assume full governing responsibilities, end quote. So in other words, Hamas is repeating what it has said in the past, that it is willing to come to a comprehensive deal for the release of all hostages in exchange for an agreed-upon amount of Palestinian prisoners, but that this would have to include an IDF withdrawal from Gaza and end to the war, and that the group is also willing to give up its governing powers in Gaza, but makes no mention of the possibility of disarming. Responding to Hamas's statements, the Israeli government immediately issued its own statement, saying that Hamas's message contains nothing new and is a repeat of the group's previous conditions for a comprehensive deal, and repeating that Israel is willing to come to a comprehensive deal and an end to the war only if its own 5 terms are met, which are again Hamas disarming, the return of all living hostages and the bodies of all dead hostages, a complete demilitarization of Gaza, i.e. not just Hamas disarming, but also other groups disarming and removing all weapons manufacturing capabilities, Israel maintaining security control over the Gaza Strip, and the establishment of a civil administration that is neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz also responded to Hamas's message, stating that, I quote, soon Hamas will understand that it must choose between 2 options, accepting Israel's terms for ending the war, chief among them releasing all hostages and disarming, or Gaza City will become Rafah and Beit Hanun, end quote. As a reminder, and obviously not by coincidence, it was 2 days after this threat to reduce Gaza City to rubble that Hamas published that hostage video that I mentioned above, saying that at least 8 hostages are held in Gaza City. That stalemate between the sides, with each of them listing completely contradictory terms for ending the war, is pretty much where things stand right now. On September 6th, U.S. President Trump issued a surprise statement from the Oval Office, saying that the United States itself is in deep negotiations with Hamas over the hostages, and again adding that he has heard that a few of the 20 living hostages have died, but that he hopes that this is not true. Regarding Trump's statements, I will say that as of the time I'm recording this, there is no corroboration from Hamas or from Israel to Trump's repeated statement that a few of the hostages have died. In fact, Israel said that they have no information about this and they don't know what Trump is relying on. And there's also no information about direct negotiations between the United States and Hamas about the hostage situation. Obviously, these things may come out later, but for now, the official negotiations between the sides are at a complete stalemate. Each side is seemingly waiting for the other one to compromise its stated terms, but there's no high-level negotiations happening between Israel and Hamas as of this point. Moving from this to the fighting in the Gaza Strip, throughout the past week, both the IDF and the Al-Qassam brigades reported intensive fighting primarily in northern Gaza, with the Al-Qassam brigade stating that they attacked Israeli tanks and bulldozers with Yasin 105 missiles in Gaza City on August 31st. So again, that is in the northern parts of Gaza over here. as well as attacking an IDF gathering site in the Jabalia refugee camp, the more eastern sides, on September 3rd. The Israeli military, in turn, reported destroying underground Hamas facilities in Jabalia refugee camp on September 1st. It also reported detonating 8-kilometer tunnel in Han Yunis in the southern parts of Gaza on that same day, and intensive fightings in the areas of Zaytun and Sajaiya, so that's these areas over here in southern Gaza City and in northeastern parts of Gaza City, all on September 2nd. The Israeli military also reported 2 assassinations. One of those was Hazem Naim, who was an El-Qassam operative who held Emily Damari, Romi Gonin, and Nama Levi in captivity, as well as Masbah Salim Da'iya, who was the leader of the Al-Mujahideen Brigades, that is a small organization in Gaza that also participated in the October 7th attack. The bulk of attention with regards to the fighting in the Gaza Strip over the past week, however, relates to the declared expansion of Israel's military operation, codenamed Gideon's Chariots B, in order to take over Gaza City. Shortly after the publication of that hostage video on September 5th, the IDF announced that it is beginning the expansion of its operation in Gaza City. The military announced that it is beginning the expansion by targeting high-rise structures that have been converted to terror infrastructures. The IDF also published a video demonstrating the identification of cameras, lookout posts, sniper and RPG launching sites, command centers, all these things that Hamas has developed and established within these different buildings. On September 5th, evacuation orders were issued to Palestinians in the areas surrounding what is known as the Mushtaha building in Gaza City, and hours later a massive airstrike took place, razing the entire building to the ground. Following his threat that Gaza City will soon become Rafah and Beit Hanun, Israel's Defense Minister Katz immediately tweeted an image of that building as it was attacked, writing above it in Hebrew, "We are starting." The next day, on September 6th, the intensification in Gaza City continued, and following a second round of evacuation orders, a second building was targeted in Gaza City, again reducing it to rubble. Responding to the IDF's accusations that these buildings were used by the Al-Qassam brigades, Hamas issued a statement on September 6th stating that none of those buildings were in fact used for military purposes, and that these attacks are part of Israel's aims to destroy Gaza City. Amidst these attacks, on September 6th, the Israeli military expanded its evacuation orders, issuing them to all Palestinians in the entire Gaza City region, again that is this entire region in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. As part of these orders, which were issued both in the media as well as in leaflets that were dropped from the sky, the IDF declared a new humanitarian zone in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, encompassing parts of Han Yunis and parts of the southern central camps, and attached to the Al-Muasi humanitarian zone. So again, that is mostly in this region over here, in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. This is the first time that a new humanitarian zone is declared by the Israeli military in 2025, and the IDF added that the area has been furbished with essential humanitarian infrastructures and called upon Palestinians to evacuate from Gaza City through the coastal Al-Rashid Road, adding that vehicles can move south without passing any IDF checkpoints. Videos disseminated later showed Palestinians evacuating the areas of northern Gaza, with some estimates being that 70,000 to 90,000 Palestinians have already evacuated the area. I will say, however, as a reminder, it is also estimated that around 800,000 Palestinians had returned to Gaza City, so possibly 70,000, 90,000 have evacuated out of those 800,000 so far. In total, in the fighting, 5 IDF soldiers were reported injured in the Gaza Strip over the past week, and no IDF soldiers reported killed, leaving the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on 456, and 2,888 soldiers reported injured. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip, in turn, reported that 997 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip over the past week, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in Gaza since the war began to 64,368, and 162,367 Palestinians reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. I remind everyone the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip does not distinguish between militants and civilians. It simply reports the entire number of people that have been killed in Gaza since the war began. I'll also say that a few days ago, I uploaded a video in which I discussed the amount of civilians versus militants that have been killed in Gaza. If you're interested in that, I will put a link to that video in the first comment below. Before moving on, in a moment of analysis, I'm going to add some context to the IDF's seemingly sudden expansion of its operation in Gaza City, which contradicts the initial timetable that the military had set out. In that timetable, the entire area was to be evacuated before the fighting portion of Gideon's Chariots B is actually begun. Over the past week, there were several reports that suggested that Israel is coming under intense pressure from the United States to possibly expedite this operation in Gaza City, and possibly that U.S. President Trump himself is losing patience with the prolonged fighting. Among these, on August 31st, it was reported that Trump is losing patience and is pressuring Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to subdue Hamas quickly. And on September 1st, Israel's Khan News network reported that Netanyahu is considering shortening the timetable of Gideon's Chariots B out of fear of losing the Republican support in the United States. It was also reported that Netanyahu stated in cabinet that Israel has Trump's backing for these operations, however, that backing is not endless. That report came out also on the same day that U.S. President Trump stated in a news interview to the Daily Caller that the war's prolonging is hurting Israel's image, and added that Israel, quote, may be winning the war, but they are losing the PR war and that this is hurting them, end quote. Despite this pressure and the fact that Israel has seemingly expedited the launching of the fighting part of this operation, the Israeli military has still repeatedly stated that it is going to take between 3 to 5 months to complete the aims that were set out by the Israeli government. And the Israeli Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, has also repeatedly stated that without a diplomatic resolution planned at the end of this operation, the result will be a prolonged military government in the Gaza Strip. As it stands right now, the military has declared that it is officially launching the expanded operation in Gaza City. However, again, the first stage of that operation is supposed to be the mass mobilization of Palestinians southward. According to the initial timetable, that was supposed to take several weeks. We will see now if that gets expedited or not. We'll learn more as time goes on. Before I conclude, I'm going to relate to an expanded report that was published in the Washington Post on August 31st, relating to plans that the U.S. administration is considering as part of a day-after strategy for the Gaza Strip. The plan, which appears in the form of 38 slides, is called the Great Trust, with GREAT standing for Gaza Reconstitution, Economic Acceleration, and Transformation. It begins by outlining that the United States will receive control over the Gaza Strip in the form of a 10-year trust that will be given to it by Israel, and will use that time to launch massive reconstructions of the entire Gaza Strip. The plan heavily emphasizes the economic benefits of Gaza's strategic location and also of the labor force in Gaza, and it envisions, among others, 10 mega projects, including seaports and airports, massive railways connecting to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and to the Gulf countries and facilitating in the mobilizing of goods from Asia through Gaza into Europe, a smart manufacturing zone that is named in this plan the Elon Musk manufacturing zone, smart cities with services that are powered and managed by artificial intelligence, and a series of resorts along the coast and on artificial islands that are dubbed in this plan the Gaza Trump Riviera and Islands Resorts. With regards to the Palestinian population, the plan discusses what it calls the quote-unquote voluntary relocation programs, offering payments and subsidies to Palestinians who are willing to relocate to other countries. Within the plan, however, it does state that the assumption is that only 25% of Palestinians will agree to such a relocation, and that the remaining 75% will be relocated within the Gaza Strip to temporary housing for those 10 years that also will have access to all humanitarian and education facilities. It also states that 30% of the land in Gaza is considered public land and could be taken over by the trust immediately in order to begin drawing investors in. And it adds that Palestinians who own the remaining 70% of the land will be offered to, quote, place their privately owned land in the trust in exchange for a token that gives them rights for permanent housing units once those are built, end quote. Now, I'm not going to develop all of the facets of that plan here, which I'll say include projects and returns of $4.5 billion US annually as a model to draw in investors. You can let me know in the comments if you'd like me to record a special video about all the facets of this plan. The reason that I am bringing it in here, however, is that while this may seem extremely far-fetched at this stage, The timing of the publication of this is interesting because it was published several days on August 31st before Trump began pressuring Israel to expedite and conclude the fighting stage in the Gaza Strip, and pressure was also leveled at Hamas to come to a comprehensive deal 3 days after this was published. So again, whether it is a realistic plan or not, it is possible that such plans are playing a role in the considerations of the White House at this point with regards to how fast it wants the war to end. That's speculation on my part. I will say this is the most comprehensive plan that has been at least leaked with regards to what the White House is considering as a day after plan in the Gaza Strip. If and when this becomes more advanced and more talk is said about it, I will obviously report more about that. At this point, this is what we know from that leak in the Washington Post. That concludes my weekly summary of the Israel-Palestine report. If you find these informative, please do remember, hit that subscribe button, send these on to anyone you think might be interested, hit that like button, and let me know if you have any questions or comments. You can feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.